We're live now.
Thank you very much, Rishenda. Welcome members, welcome officers. Hello, everyone. And like to begin by welcoming any members of the public and press who may be watching the live stream of this Zoom meeting. This is the Adults Committee. And members, you're obviously aware by now of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting. So if anyone that isn't doing that could do so now, that would be great. And to keep your microphone muted, except obviously when I invite you to speak.
Chair, can I just apologise? I am going to get my video on just as quickly as I possibly can. I've got builders and they just started drilling, just as literally at the beginning of the meeting, so I've had to move. I will come to you in just 1 second. I am here.
No problem, Councillor Harrison. Thank you for that update, and thank you for making the effort to do what you can with the builders in. Never easy. So obviously, as ever, please click the blue raise hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment on any of the items. Obviously, there's always the risk that we might get into a technical difficulty, and I ask for your patience if that happens. If it does happen, we may need to declare an adjournment while we address the fault. So we'll address that if it happens. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may have to be abandoned until we can reconvene it, but hopefully that won't happen. And obviously just a reminder that all virtual meetings are recorded. So I'll start by calling the names of all members of the committee just to establish your presence. So please unmute your microphones now. We haven't actually received any apologies for absence, although I note that Councillor Giles hasn't made it onto the meeting today. So I'll call names one by one. Councillor David Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Adela Costello.
Present.
Councillor Sandra Crawford.
Present.
Councillor Derek Giles has not made it to the meeting. Hope he's okay. Councillor Mark Goldsack.
Present.
Councillor Nicola Harrison.
Present.
Councillor Mark Howell.
Present.
Councillor David Wells.
Present.
Councillor Graham Wilson.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Anna Bailey. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest for items on the agenda today? If you do, please use the blue hand function. Can't see anyone indicating, so we will move on to item 2. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 2nd of July as a correct record. Can I ask anyone who doesn't agree with that proposal to raise your hand, blue hand function now on the right of your screen? I can't see anyone indicating, so I'll take that as no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as a correct record. So we'll take that as carried. Okay, so moving on to item 3, which is the action log. Does anybody have any comments on the action log on the agenda? Any questions? If so, please raise your blue hand. I've got Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things. The first item, minute 233, the status is on hold with any backlog in CHC assessments during COVID will start on the 1st of September. I'd be interested in knowing whether there's any update on that. And the second 295 COVID-19 update report on the council's response. I'd be interested again if there's any update on whether the engagement plan will inform the development of approaches to support, sustainability of the care market. Because we knew the work that was going on to support the care homes and the uplift in funds that was being offered, and I may have missed it, but I can't see anything in subsequent papers indicating what we're intending to do next. And if we don't cover it now, perhaps we could cover it later.
We've got the item on the agenda today that talks about the distribution of the government funds, which was the 75% directly to the care home market and 25% distribution at our discretion, and that information is in a later report. But let's just go back to officers. So Will Patton, would you mind commenting on the work with the Learning Disability Pool budget?
Yes, thank you, Anna. So we have been in discussions with CCG about this and agreeing a priority around assessments. We've agreed with the CCG that the priority will be those who are discharged as part of the first phase of COVID, and those assessments are going on as we speak, and they're forecasted to run until the beginning of March, excuse me, when that resource will then shift back to assessments around the LDP. So the latest forecast is for those assessments to start in March time.
Thank you very much. And in terms of 295, we've obviously got the paper today, which is talking about the government funds received to date. But obviously this item was about sort of looking forward and shoring up the market for the future. Are you able to comment on where we're up to with that?
Yes, thanks, Anna. So I'd like to cover that off, if I may, as part of the update on the recovery plan.
Is that all right with you, Councillor Wilson? We'll deal with that at the item.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I just didn't want to miss it. That was all. Thank you.
No, that's great. Okay, so we've logged that request well and truly. Any other members have anything on the action log? No. Okay, so we'll take that as noted. Item 4 is petitions and public questions. We haven't received any today, so we'll move on to the next item of business. And item 5 is the contract extension for the home care car provision. Karen Chambers, are you with us? Are you able? Yes, there you are.
I'm here, yes.
Introduce. Sorry, you can see, I'm on, just so everybody knows, I've got my people on 2 screens, so it's a bit complicated. Karen, over to you.
No, it's always difficult on Zoom. No, thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Just before I give a summary of the paper and the request that's been made, just to say this is the first time that I've presented to Adults Committee, so if you hear a little wobble or a little stumble, that'll be the nerves coming through, but I will do my best.
You're doing very well so far, Karen.
Thank you. So the paper that I'm presenting today asks committee to approve an exemption to enable us to extend a contract. The contract that we're talking about is a block hour contract of domiciliary care, and we would like to request to extend this for a period of 12 months to take us through to November next year. So in terms of background, this particular contract has a number of cars. So it is a block car care contract, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but that is how it works. We have 20 cars based across Cambridgeshire that are available 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, that enable us to be able to support people being discharged from hospital as quickly as possible to be able to go home and get the care that they need as I say, as quickly as possible. Now, this contract was due to end in November this year, and we had planned to carry out a full review of that contract and look at if there is a better way of providing that particular service. Unfortunately, as we all know, COVID arrived on our doorsteps earlier this year and put paid really for us to be able to carry out that detailed piece of work, and we've also needed to be able to absolutely maintain that capacity within the market. So unfortunately we were unable to carry out that piece of work and be ready to be re-tender and have a new contract in place for November this year. There's also a paper coming, and I believe it follows this, and Alison will be presenting that, because we're also looking to review our interim respite and reablement provision, and we want to be able to do this piece of work in conjunction so that what we then end up is a discharge pathway from hospital that covers everything that we need it to cover and also takes into account the new discharge to assess pathway that's currently being recommended and implemented by the government. So in brief, really, this paper asks for your approval for us to be able to extend this contract, to be able to do this piece of work with the system, engage with all the relevant stakeholders and develop a pathway that will work across older people and care in the county, and be in a position to be able to procure appropriately by November next year. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Absolutely perfect introduction and nice and concise. Thank you very much, Karen. So would any members of the committee who wish to ask a question or make a comment, please use the blue hand function now. It's a straightforward request. Councillor Wilson.
I feel I ought to ask some questions and make some comments. I think this is eminently sensible, so support it fully, Karen. I just wanted to confirm a couple of things. Firstly, the rates for these cars are not going to change. And secondly, the procurement, head of procurement has suggested a VEET notice is issued. I don't know whether that has already been issued, and if so, has there been any reaction? Because I think it would be a pity if there was.
Thank you. Over back to you, Karen.
So if I okay, thank you. So to take the first part, no, we don't intend that the rate will change, which is part that I should have covered that off, because that's why we asked for to be able to continue the contract with the current providers so that we can sustain the current rate, because there is the risk that if we went out to market, A, it's not a good time to go out to market at the moment anyway, and B, there's always the risk that the cost could increase. So and no, the VEET notice won't, or the transparency notice won't have been issued until we had confirmation that we can go forward with this process.
Okay, thank you
Hopefully
for
that helps.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Has any other member got any questions of clarification or points that they would like to raise? Councillor Goldsack.
It's just a quick one. I actually put a call into Karen just for clarification before this, because it's quite right to until you know I thought the word care had been spelt wrong and we were buying cars, and so but actually to get the very clear, this is a Red Adair style service of people sitting and waiting to go where we need them to go and being absolutely ready, and I think it's absolutely what we want and absolutely the right thing for us to be doing. So, and well done, Karen, you did very well.
Very much, Councillor Goldsack. Yeah, I think this is just a pragmatic approach to renewing this. It's currently essential service. Obviously, we're looking to reconfigure services quite radically in the future, but this is a very needed service at the current time and supports people coming out of hospital, so very necessary. Okay, I'm not seeing any other members wishing to speak. I haven't heard anybody speaking against it, so there does seem to be general consensus in support of the recommendation, so propose to just take that by consensus. If anyone disagrees with that approach, can you put your blue hand up now? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone there, so we will take that recommendation as carried. Thank you very much, Karen. All very clear and straightforward. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, which is another contract extension request, and this is around interim block beds across the county. And Alison Bourne is here somewhere to introduce the report. Nice to see you, Alison. Somewhere, where are you?
I'm here. I'm just trying to unmute trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Hello, Councillor Bailey and councillors. This is a request to approve a contract extension for 7 months and 26 days for the block interim beds across Cambridgeshire. Karen has already covered off some of what this paper covers, and you've got the paper hopefully in front of you, so I won't go through it in great detail, but as you will see, we've identified that we need to improve our interim bed provision in order to better meet the needs of people leaving hospital who are unable to return home immediately. So this pathway will sit alongside the work that Karen's doing with the block cars. As Karen pointed out, we're planning to develop a care pathway which will ensure better outcomes for people leaving hospital. And in particular, we're really wanting to ensure that people are supported to maximise their independence. We want to transform that post-discharge offer to ensure that as many people as possible go home and not into permanent bed-based care. And we want to explore how best to do that. As Karen has said, now is not the ideal time to do that. Therefore, we're wanting the extension in order to maintain provision. There'll possibly be a second wave of COVID coming through, and there will be the normal winter pressures as well. I want to align that work with Karen's work so that we're developing something that's truly transformative. But we want to maintain provision whilst we do that. In addition to that, the government has just published discharge to assess policy, and we're working through the implications of that with the CCG. So there is the possibility that we might have to adapt our commissioning intentions in order to fit in or to accommodate the new guidance on policy on discharge to assess. Obviously, if that's the case, we might need to come back to the committee to explain what we're intending to do. But at the moment, we want to just extend the provisions so that we can look at all the options to ensure that we're offering the best possible post-discharge service for people. So has anyone got any questions?
Thank you very much, Alison. Excellent introduction. Just welcome to Councillor Giles, who I see has just managed to make it to the meeting. Welcome, Councillor Giles. Good to see you.
Can you see me okay, Chairman?
We can see that sort of half of your head. So if you want to just tilt your screen, we might be able to see you better. For those that don't know, Alison was one of the Neighbourhood Cares team members, so I can't think of anyone better to be working on a radical transformation of our services, Alison. So thank you very much for your report. Do any members have any questions? It's obviously in a similar vein to the previous item that we just heard.
Could I just, Chair?
Councillor Harrison, yes. We're using the blue hand function in future, if that's all right.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay.
Just to say, it's just that when everyone's got the papers up as well and the Zoom screen minimised, those things disappear, don't they? So I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask really what an interim bed is. I mean, I wasn't aware of, perhaps I should have been, but I wasn't aware of this particular contract. I'm interested in a way that it's only 18, because obviously there are an awful lot of people coming out of hospital, and presumably an awful lot of them are, in a sense, going into some form of interim arrangement, that will eventually lead them to a better place, as it were. So I was wondering, what specifically this contract does, really, and how it fits with other kind of interim arrangements that people go into.
Of course, and it's a very good question. So the 18 interim beds across Cambridgeshire are used where people cannot, for whatever reason, return home immediately. There is also a health offer of interim beds. At the moment, they're sort of two separate groups of beds, and the health beds are used, for example, when somebody has broken their hip, for example, and cannot wait there and therefore cannot go home. But most people who break their hips can go home, but there are a few who won't be able to because of the nature of the fracture, etc. So they will go into an interim bed under health pathway, or did previously. The local authority interim beds are used slightly differently. They're not used where there is necessarily a health need, but they're for people who cannot return home immediately. We try and ensure that everybody returns home out of hospital wherever possible, but there will be some people, for example, because the setup of their home needs to be changed slightly, or because there is something going on in the home environment which needs to be resolved before they can go home. And the idea is that then they go into the interim beds, not as a last resort, but as it's not the preferred place of discharge. However, there will always be people who cannot go home straight away for whatever reason, and therefore those beds need to be kept for that purpose. They can also be kept for short-term emergencies, for emergency placements. For example, if somebody is looked after by their husband or wife, and the husband or wife has a medical incident and ends up in hospital, quite often the cared for person may end up in hospital as well, not because they need to be in hospital, but because there's nowhere else for them to go, and they're not safe to be supported at home, and therefore the interim beds also provide that function. And they can also occasionally be used if people are unwell but not unwell enough to need hospital treatment. So they're a sort of stopgap provision, an interim provision, and that's what they're primarily used for at the moment. But we haven't necessarily been using them as effectively as we could be, and that's why we want to have an opportunity to look at how can we really meet people's needs. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Thanks for that, Alison. And I've got Councillor David Wells.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think understandable why you want to extend it, and there's not time to do the more detailed review now. So in principle, I'm happy with the proposal. One question I had was, with COVID going on, and we've seen some pressure for discharges from hospital and that, have you seen a change in the demand for your beds with COVID?
So at the moment, there are a number of beds across the county being utilised in order to address the shift from people being in hospital to being out of hospital because of COVID. However, those people that has worked its way through, and people are now returning home, hopefully, or into whatever place of care they will be in. It's very difficult to say what the future demand will be, because the last 6 months have been extraordinary. So the bed utilisation figures, we think, have been higher in the last few months, but what I would say is I haven't got robust data at the moment, and that's one of the things we're looking at to ensure that our data is absolutely robust, that we will go forward and commission on an evidence-based basis of what is actually needed. But yes, I mean, those are the sorts of things we're looking at. How have they been used under COVID, and what is the requirement going forward? And that's a bit of an unknown at the moment. We're hoping by next year, early next year, spring next year, that we will have a much clearer picture of what the situation is and what the demand is.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Are there any other members wanting to ask anything or raise any points? Not seeing anybody. So it seems that there is, again, nobody's spoken against the idea of this. There seems to be a general consensus in support of the recommendation. So I propose to take that now. If anybody doesn't agree with the recommendation, if they could raise their blue hand, that would be the time to do so. Not seeing any objections, so we will take that as carried. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Right, moving on to item 7 and onto the People and Communities Priorities and Recovery Plan. Big plan, a lot of work gone into this. I think Wendy's going to introduce the report for us. Please, Wendy, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to say that, you know, it is quite a big paper. And the paper actually seeks to provide you with an overview of the business planning approach that we're actually taking. And what we want is to seek your views on our approach and at the end of the day, your agreement. Because it is such a big paper and we want to bring it to life, we've developed a short presentation, which both Will and Charlotte want to take you through. And then you'll be able to ask questions on those specific areas, if that's okay. And I think, Tamar, you're going to upload the presentation for us. So thank you, and over to Will.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. If we could just go, I think, cut to slide 3, I think, please. Thank you. So the purpose of the presentation is to provide a summary of our recommended approach which will also help to inform budget planning for 21-22. Just a bit of background, and we've heard some of it already. The impact of COVID on our demand-led services and budgets has been very, very significant and has materially changed the nature of demand and cost of the services that we provide. We've also seen shifts and changes in public perceptions of services and behaviours. So the environment that we are in is very different to the pre-COVID environment, and it's continually changing and shifting, and that clearly then is impacting on all of our services. And what this presentation summarises is our recommended response to those changes and also the challenges over the next 18 to 24 months. So if we could go to slide 4. We do have some very significant costs on the horizon and what we call latent demand coming through. The national funding and support has been very welcome, but there are ongoing longer term costs, demands and pressures that this plan aims to address and try and mitigate. And I just wanted to give a few examples of some of what we mean by latent demand and pressures. So to give a few examples, we've seen that people's needs have increased considerably over the COVID period, and that's largely because they haven't had access to services, particularly NHS services, over the last 6 or 7 months. And during that period, their needs have increased, and clearly that has implications on our services. We've seen, particularly around carers, both formal and informal carers are becoming exhausted actually, and we've seen some evidence of carer breakdown, and linked to that is increased levels of isolation, both of which we know create demand for us. I think it's fair to say that we're getting feedback that there is a loss of trust in some of our traditional services, and particularly our residential-based services, and that's largely as a result of some of the media coverage. And then, of course, on top of this, the market has had lots of pressure around things like introducing infection control measures, and so we've got this sort of demand that's been building up in the community, and at a time when we're coming into winter pressures, flu, and we've also got the NHS sort of, and rightly, ramping up their business as usual. You go to slide 5, please. So during the first phase of COVID, we shifted and focused our resources and assets to focus on local communities. In essence, we joined up and operationalised the Think Communities programme with the Adults Positive Work. We also jointly commissioned services with health, and we supported the market through tactical financial support, but also professionally qualified support and advice. And we learned that this approach has worked really well and actually has the potential to deliver on our outcomes and is also capable of preventing and delaying demand at the same time, and so therefore mitigating some of our cost. And just on outcomes, if we go to the next slide. Just on outcomes, they haven't really changed. So, but what has changed is the environment that we're working in, and that's what this recovery plan is recommending that we address. So, you know, the focus on prevention, for example, carer support. You can read the list. Stronger collaboration and joint working across the system remains the outcomes that we want to focus on, because we know that the positive impact that will have. So if we move to slide 7. So our recommended recovery is based on a prevent, reduce and delay approach, and it brings together and operationalises the Think Communities work, the Adults Positive Change work. It introduces the need to continue to professionally support care homes and move to place-based commissioning. It recognises the different care models are required, so it introduces the care suites and of course the need to continue to support market sustainability. So the plan is very focused on cost avoidance and it builds on the lessons that we've learned and proved over the past 6 months as part of the first phase of COVID. And under each of these, we give some examples here about, you know, what the things that we think are important going forward and the things that we want to do. So the plan focuses very much on using community assets and working closer with communities, making sure that, you know, those communities and asset that we have place-based commissioning in place at a community level, and that we include voluntary sector, volunteers and so on and so forth. It also includes things like using technology to transform the way we work together and with our communities. And of course, things like extensive support to maintain our formal and informal care arrangements. And on slides 8, 9 and 10, we go into more detail, and there are some statements in there about the things that we're recommending under the prevent, reduce and delay approach. If I go to slide 12, please. So kind of in summary, to deliver this plan, initial investment will be required to support some of the areas. COVID has changed the environment very significantly. There is a lot of latent demand, and this recovery plan is focused on mitigating that as much as we can. And the areas that we think that investment required is the continued operationalization of Think Communities, place-based commissioning, market resilience, and professional support for our care homes, and of course care suites. Those are being worked up at the moment, as are the savings. So COVID has impacted on our savings this year, especially in relation to the Adults Positive Challenge programme. We're working through the full impact of those, and again, we'll be working on savings and opportunities alongside the investments for financial year 21 and 22. So before I pass on to Charlotte, Anna, would you like us to keep going?
I think we'll keep going, and then we can have questions afterwards.
Okay, so if we could go to slide 14, please, Tamar. Thank you. Sorry, it's the one before that. I think that's the one, yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more information really about what we think is going on from a kind of operational perspective and the feedback I'm getting from frontline teams. So I think the main thing I would say in terms of summary is that during the lockdown, we didn't see sort of massive changes, but I think at the moment it's quite unclear what the impact of lockdown has been, and we're starting to see some quite complex cases now, much more complex, much higher levels of need than we would ordinarily have seen. Some of that is because people have sort of held on for longer, and some of it is to do with access to other services, including health, housing, etc. We have inevitably had an increase in deaths, but we also think that probably what that's inevitably meant is that some of those deaths have happened sooner than they would have otherwise done. But we're really noticing that people's confidence has increased quite a lot, that there's quite a lot of strain amongst carers. And people, as Will said, people are making different choices really now in terms of their care needs. If we could go on to 17, please, Tamar. Thank you. So this is just an example. There are a number of slides available in the pack, and I wasn't going to go through them all, but this is just an example of one of those. So what you can see is sort of around the time of the peak, there was a sort of steady we went through a period where we transferred a lot of people out of hospital into beds that were funded through the NHS. So a bit of a strange sort of period really, and we're now just finding out what the impact on social care is of that. But what's fairly clear is that quite a lot of those people will be becoming the responsibility of social care, although we have got generally, as Will was saying, quite a lot of people who are wanting to look at other forms of care inevitably. If we could move on to number 20, please, Tamar. Sorry, the one before, that's the one. So we've had something called an adults extended leadership group meeting, and we've used that to try and get a sense from frontline staff about exactly what is going on. So one of the things that we're noticing is also quite a lack of confidence. So quite a lot of older people, and you will all know people yourselves, who are sort of reluctant to leave the house still. We've also got quite a lot of people with learning disabilities who would probably benefit from accessing day services again, but equally feeling concerned and constraints around transport, etc. We initially had a drop-off in safeguarding referrals, but we've now had a really significant increase in safeguarding referrals with some quite complex cases. And inevitably, we had some people whose care packages did stop or reduce during the peak, where family got more involved, but those are now starting to increase again. We've had an increase in the number of people needing mental health act assessments. And as I say, we've got quite a lot of cases where multiple impacts of lockdown is probably the best way to describe it. If we go on to the next one, please, Tamar, and the next one. So this is just to remind you really that Adults Positive Challenge is our demand management transformation program. We thought that probably by the end of this financial year we would have been in a position where we would have a limited amount of additional work to do, but inevitably we have had to put some things that we were going to do on hold. We've had to remodel exactly what savings we think will be delivered in this financial year. So this program will continue into the next year, and we will use it as a basis for the sort of recovery work for the response to COVID, and we're making adaptations to the programme to reflect that, and that will obviously feature in the business plan. But we're not in as strong a position as we would have been, because obviously the demand that we thought we were going to be trying to manage has changed, and there's a lot more kind of moving parts in terms of adult social care demand at the moment, and a lot more kind of unknowns, I think, going forward. So we're very, very focused at the moment on working out exactly what APC can continue to deliver in this financial year and in the next financial year. And we have identified some new delivery areas, one of which is a much more explicit link with All Think Communities work. Thank you. Next one, please, Tamar. So this is just to remind you what Adults Positive Challenge is and the work streams that we've got, and to tell you what the focus will be for the rest of 2021-22. So obviously carers is very, very high on the agenda. This is a really critical issue. It was an area where we knew we needed to do more work, and we'll be bringing a deep dive to the next Adults Committee to talk about that. But actually, carers have been absolutely critical to how we as a society really have managed through the period of the peak of the pandemic, and will continue to be really crucial, but are carrying quite a heavy load. So we definitely know that we can do more around carers. We're going to continue our Changing the Conversation work with a particular focus on learning disability, children with disabilities, and also mental health. And we are going to continue to have a real push on tech to make this the first thing, not the second or last thing that people think about when they're thinking about a solution. And there's some really exciting work happening, and we've learned quite a lot during the pandemic about other opportunities that there might be with, for example, in residential homes and with dom care providers and others. Thank you, Tamar. Next one. We are also looking at a work stream that we're calling independence and wellbeing. So this used to be largely focused on enablement, but we're now broadening that out to think about how do we get better value from our occupational therapists that sit in CPFT, and the work around falls prevention. So we'll have an explicit savings target or cost avoidance target around falls prevention work that public health lead. And then the two areas that are sort of less developed but really crucial. One is working with particularly, I mean, 0 to 25 services. Our children with disabilities are coming into adults in Cambridge. They're already in adults in Peterborough, and that's a really good opportunity for us to think about transition and increasing that focus on preparation for adulthood and independence. And day services and day opportunities is another area where it's probably the area of operational delivery where there's been most change as a result of the peak of the pandemic. And we are currently in the process of working out who we can get back into day services, the costs associated with that, and how do we make sure those services are really helping us to deliver all the cost avoidance and good outcomes that we know that they're capable of. And I think, do another one, Tamar? Yes, that's just, sorry, that's just more of the same. I think I have covered all the main points I wanted to cover.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Take any questions.
Thank you. I think we should probably just say that we'll ask Tamar to send those slides around to all members of the Adults Committee, so we've got them so people can look at the detail if they want to after the meeting.
Sorry, I've just realised, Councillor Bailey, I did miss some around Think Communities.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's go back. Tamar, if we can have the slides on Think Communities.
Thank you.
Most importantly.
So yeah. So I want to talk about this because this is really crucial in terms of, as Will was saying, thinking about how adults, positive challenge and Think Communities and the recovery work all fit together. So if you just move on to the next slide. So we've done a lot of work, I think. We learned an awful lot about the potential for building really good, strong community networks through the peak of the pandemic. And I think it's really given us an opportunity from the perspective of this committee to really understand how the added value of this approach to adult social care. So we know that if the Think Communities work is happening, we get the most local decision making, very supportive of the neighbourhood cares principles that we had. And we've talked about a lot at this committee, making best use of the voluntary sector, and really getting really good local problem solving and decisions and solutions at a very local level. So it really links into many of the things that have been talked about already and the things that are on this agenda. It's kind of knits all of that together really nicely. Next one, please, Tamar. So this slide is great because it shows really clearly, I think, to you as a committee, what does Think Communities mean and what does it mean in terms of adult social care? So there are a number of priorities that have been identified, obviously not all to do with adults because the whole essence of Think Communities is about a whole community. But we've got some really clear ideas now about how through a Think Communities approach we can transform and improve our support for carers. To think about, for many older people, the issue actually is isolation and loneliness. So the neighbourhood cares pilot did some excellent work around intergenerational work. So if Think Communities can help us make that much more normal, then that would be brilliant because that's something adult social care doesn't have the capacity to do. We're also talking about how we can use Think Communities approach to increase the use of tech. So, could library staff, for example, be doing more to promote the use of tech and be more proactive on that front? So those are just some examples. And at the top, you'll see the reference to place-based commissioning. So we know, and we learnt through neighbourhood cares, we would like our commissioning of dom care to be much more place-based, much more locally sensitive, building on local networks and organisations. And so that is obviously going to be really crucial. So that's a really important part of how we move forward, that we're very keen to kind of get happening as quickly as possible, and is happening, starts to happen through the kind of the most challenging period of the pandemic with the shielded group in particular, but also other groups that came through to the community hubs. And I think there's one more slide, and that's just showing really Think Communities in a broader corporate context. So you can really see, I think, that if you put the person at the centre, and think about what are the solutions that matter to the problems that matter to them. That brings in public health. It brings in the corporate priorities around things like place and economy and climate change. So it's very much a sort of a unifying approach, as the slide says, in action, but making sense to all of those agendas, very much from the perspective of the member of the local community in their local context. And I think that is it. Is there any more, Tamar? No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Comprehensive presentation. And yes, if we can make sure, Tamar, we get the slides out to members, that'd be really good after the meeting. Okay, I've got Councillor Crawford.
Unmute myself. Yeah, my question is partly provoked by some questions that my colleague on the Health Committee observed when she looked at the papers. And I feel her questions are quite important, so I thought I'd bring them today. We both wondered about the actual clarity on the focus of the Think communities, because we feel it really compares so strongly with the positive challenge transformation plans. We wondered what, whether the focuses were particularly different. And also we thought it looks to us as well as if the Think Communities bid doesn't require any financial savings like the Positive Challenge Programme bid. And we wondered if the focus of the Think Communities was therefore more a desire to invest in prevention rather than make savings in itself. I don't know if I make myself really clear on that. Is that okay?
Both excellent questions, Sandra. Yeah, very clear. Charlotte, do you want to take that?
Yeah, they are different. So the Adults Positive Challenge Programme is really focused on those people who are either currently within the responsibility of adult social care, or unless we do something quite different, they will be. Whereas Think Communities is really about a whole population approach, and the other so obviously a much broader range of people. They're very complementary. Obviously a lot of people don't necessarily come the way of adult social care, but they do have, unless we do something very different, then there is the potential to be. So in my mind, what it does is it broadens the range of activities that we're doing around cost avoidance to a much wider population. And the other difference is that what it will help us do is make Adults Positive Challenge programs much more localized. So at the moment we might have we'll have a whole piece of work around promoting tech-enabled care across the county. But where we sometimes struggle is how do we get to the point where, the library staff are doing that, or the district council housing staff are doing that. So I think that's the added value, is it gives a sort of very local dimension to that, but it's also broader. And in terms of will it deliver savings, I think it's so if we take carers as an example, the work, we know that one of the things that can drive adult social care costs is carer breakdown. So if, within the Adults Positive Challenge Programme, we will work with the carers that we know, the ones that are known to adult social care. But what Think Communities will do is work with a much broader range of people who may not even describe themselves as carers, but were they to get to the point where they couldn't care anymore, couldn't cope anymore, then they could end up being in the group that adult social care is supporting. I hope that helps.
Did you want to add anything from a commissioning perspective? Because part of Sandra's question was, is Think Communities a desire to invest rather than sort of say?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I think it's exactly as Charlotte has described. From a commissioning point of view, the beauty of Think Communities is that it roots commissioning into local communities. And so, from a commissioning point of view, it means that you can really start to draw on local assets and meet those needs using local assets in a very tailored, very specific and very targeted way.
Great, thank you. I mean, the way I think about communities is it's just a pooling of all the resources that are available in any given community, and for that community to shape and work out how best to support itself. Really, I think that's at a very high level. That's what it's about. Councillor Harrison. We can't hear you, Councillor Harrison. Sorry, need to unmute.
Sorry, it's mind-bogglingly complex. I find, you know, I'm daunted on your behalf and grateful to you for an incredibly good report. I think it's a fantastic document. You've produced fantastic thinking. I'm so impressed. I don't want this to sound like a cliche question or a sort of, you know, kind of as if I can't do the thinking myself, but actually I can't, because it is so complicated. I just wondered if you know, Charlotte and Will, you might want to find 2 or 3 things that you would want to point out to us so that we are keeping our eye on the super strategic, which I suppose is our absolutely primary role. You know, 2 or 3 things that are really the main differences that you feel are now coming out of this than where we were before. You know, we've tried to understand and follow the pathway and support you on the pathway you were on before. You've said a lot already in your presentations and in the report, but I just wondered if you could sort of extract some things for me so that I can take some things away that I won't forget, because they're short enough to, you know, make me remember. Does that make sense?
It does, Nicola. It's a good question, because, you know, many of this, the content of this report is very familiar to us because it's the direction of travel we were going down anyway. But I mean, it literally sort of happened overnight because of COVID, and the community stepped up and started just doing it as a natural response. And it's about how we make that really work long term and make it better and make it more sustainable, I guess. But I think it's a good question to ask about, are there any specific
May I
points
just
of
interrupt just to say that it's also about the kind of change, you know, the sort of changes, the difficulties, the problems that, you know, have been pointed out to us, which do sound some of them sound, you know, pretty serious and daunting.
Charlotte, who wants to take that? Wendy, Charlotte, Will, any of you want to chip in?
I'm happy to kick off, unless when I can't try and see Wendy. Do you want to say,
Charlotte? You go first. I'll go off.
So I suppose my big kind of take-home message would be that actually I don't think we yet know the impact of COVID. So I think that we're starting to see, during the peak of the pandemic, actually it was all, I mean, our focus was very much on getting people out of hospital, keeping people safe, in a way supporting the lockdown and making sure that people were in a really safe environment, and avoided the infection as far as possible. I think what we're starting to see now is as I said, a range of sort of complex cases where there are multiple factors that have impacted on people, combined with a real lack of confidence in, particularly amongst older people, in going out and leaving the house, which will inevitably reduce their mobility and will probably reduce their independence. So I think the thing I'm most kind of conscious of at the moment is trying to understand what's ahead in terms of demand and need, and we don't know yet what's going to happen with the pandemic. So I think the main thing I would say is it's a much harder situation to predict and manage, because there are so many variables, including the fact that we've had some services that were initially funded by the NHS, but we're now picking up the costs.
Thank you, Charlotte. And it would be remiss of us not to highlight, you know, this conversation is showing the absolute importance of trying to keep down a second wave and to stop it hitting. You know, it really brings it home, and all that work that went into the first wave about protecting the NHS beds, you know, all continues and is all necessary, and we know the numbers are taking off, and it's our opportunity to say to the public of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, you know, let's not let that happen in our patch, and let's all keep doing the good work to continue to protect our services, really, and our residents. I've got Councillor, did Will or Wendy want to add anything? Sorry.
Yeah, can I just, all I wanted to say, Nicola, Nicola, well, it's Nicola as well. What I wanted to say is Charlotte's right. We don't know the impact of COVID, but what we do know is that people have really benefited by the place-based approach that we adopted during the pandemic, because in each place, we were able to meet the individual needs more effectively, and actually it was at a lesser cost to some degree. So I do think it proved really what everybody on this committee knows, is that actually a place-based approach that builds on the assets of a local community is the way forward. So it almost cemented that for us. Charlotte's also right that we do know that there is going to be latent demand, that with things like carers have done a brilliant job during the pandemic, but quite frankly, they're very tired now. And we're trying to be proactive in terms of offering in the additional help now. So I do think we are thinking about the impact, though we don't know for definite. So that's just the key things I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And Will, anything from your perspective to add?
Yeah, if I can. So I do think that we are in very uncertain times as a result of COVID. COVID obviously hasn't gone away, at the same time as other pressures coming through, like the NHS returning to business as usual. So our services are going to be under, I think, quite a lot of strain. And I think Wendy is right. The Think Communities or the community approach absolutely delivered in helping us mitigate some of that in the first wave of COVID. I think it's important to talk about providers who were absolutely amazing, and the carer workforce have been absolutely amazing in the first phase of COVID. And we need to continue to support them over the course of the recovery plan.
And I think it's also incumbent on me to recognise the supporting role that Cambridgeshire County Council took of our providers. We've had lots of wonderful comments back from providers about the job that we did in supporting providers through particularly the early stages, but right through the pandemic. And I think we can be proud of the way that we supported providers and provided information and PPE and financial support and all the rest of it. And I know how hard officers work to do that, and putting in staff into care homes, for example. There was a huge effort to, try and be all in it together, really, I think. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, and thank you for the very comprehensive report. I was struck in your introduction about talking about latent demand and exhaustion and mental health challenges, about just the sheer scale of the challenge that you've got. And I think you partly answered that in responding to Councillor Harrison, but I wondered if there were any particular areas that concern you in terms of not being able to sort of meet those latent demands.
I think one area that we're finding quite challenging at the moment, I think, and Oliver and Will will both confirm if this is right, is certainly there's an issue around people needing nursing dementia beds. So, people with quite complex needs where we're not, that's certainly been a gap. Don't know, Will, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so you're right, there are pockets of and dementia, particularly residential dementia, is one of those where we found in the first phase of COVID that we didn't have adequate capacity, or not enough capacity on tap as that demand was coming through, and so we've been working really hard with providers to kind of build up the capacity, to help us build up that particular capacity. And again, many, providers have responded really positively to that. But, and this is what this in a way is about, some of the uncertainty, and particularly going forward is, we're very mindful of keeping track of, the demand on our services and the capacity available, and wherever we can, trying to preempt that. And we've had some of it today, haven't we, with some of the earlier papers around the block cars, for example, or the interim beds. And that's about us making sure, trying to stay on the front foot and try and make sure that we've got the right capacity in the right place. But it is a challenge.
the funding is such an unknown at the moment as well. Councillor,
a positive, I think, that I'm sure the committee will be really pleased to hear about is that we're getting a lot of interest in jobs. So we are currently seeking to over-recruit enablement, so to more people than we actually have posts to prepare for kind of potential turnover. We're just advertising for a dedicated team of social workers to support care homes. Got an incredibly high level of interest in those posts. I mean, people really want to do that work from other authorities as well as locally. So that's an interesting and a really good positive, is that we don't have lots of vacancies at the moment, quite the reverse.
It's excellent news, and as we move forward into trying to localise services and be more flexible with support out in our communities as well, I think that's really exciting. That's a big positive. Councillor Goldsack.
Thanks, Chair. Officers, likewise, from what other people have said, this is a extremely well written and very well thought out and quite innovative, difficult to say, report. One area that jumps out to me, and it's been a little bit of a bee in my bonnet for the last couple of meetings, is the question to you guys is, do you think you've captured enough in terms of what has been marvellous in the voluntary sector these last 6 months to support you where and when it can?
I think that's a very fair challenge, actually. I think there are things that have gone on in the community that certainly, without which we would have had some real difficulties, and the level of support, very local support, has been absolutely incredible. So I think that's a fair challenge, and I think we can probably capture that more. I suspect some of the work that Adrian Chapman's doing will capture that.
I think it will, but I have to say, it's very difficult to criticise such a good report, but I found it was a little bit lacking in terms of bringing that together. For instance, the camaraderie, the thing. What we need to be looking at now is how we can enforce some of those volunteers with some skills, knowledge, some transfer, some exposure, so that actually they can become, almost your early points of capture and notice. And then what we need to do is we need to make it very easy for these volunteers to be able to report a note of concern and how they do it. And that's very difficult. It's easy to go shopping and it's easy to go and chat to somebody, but it's actually giving them the skills that really would lessen the burden on you guys and your teams, really.
I think that's an absolutely excellent point, Mark, and we really need to write that down. And I think it's a key action point, actually, as to how we try and build that in. And some of those people many of those people hopefully continue to be community volunteers, but some of them might also want to, take on and become our sort of local domiciliary care workers of the future as well. So I think that's an excellent point, well noted.
Charlotte and I have mentioned before about possibilities of a volunteer group training. We're not talking about in-depth stuff, but just visual stuff and stuff that can help. I just think this. Look, we're the members in the room will get this. We have to look at every single pound, shillings, and pence. So the more that we can get from the voluntary sector positively, the less pound, shillings, and pence. But it's not just about that. I've seen an amazing upswing in community focus, community care, and all the good things about living in a small tight-knit community. And we just don't want to lose it. And we've got a great chance here. I know Adrian and his team are doing great things in this area. All I'm saying is we just need to go like this now and somehow find a link. And I think we'll do it, but I've just wanted to highlight it.
I think inherently those people that are stepping up to volunteer and want to support, are people that are, kind of pretty tuned in and noticing things and probably want to be able to respond properly and positively. And I know in East Cambs, we've been running some mental health training for our volunteers, and people have really valued that. Look, people have attended and really, really found it valuable and helpful.
Anna, that's a great example.
It arms our work, it arms our sort of volunteer effort, doesn't it, with the best tools to be able to respond in the best way. So I think it's a really valid point.
One of my oldest phrases is volunteers are like everybody, they don't know what they don't know. What I'm saying here is we've got an opportunity to help them know a little bit more that may encourage them to be even broader and better volunteers. So let's not miss the opportunity.
Okay, and Wendy, you had your hand up, so I'm bringing you in before Councillor Wilson on the basis that you might have wanted to respond.
Well, I think Councillor Goldsack said it all, but actually, okay. I think it would really help the paper if and the presentation if we just added a couple of examples of actually the great work that has been done, because I think it brings it to life. So we will actually do that, because obviously we're using the paper in lots of different arenas. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Wilson.
And thanks, Chair. And what Mark has said about local volunteers was one of the points I was going to make. I think over the last few months, we've seen the tremendous work that volunteer groups can do. My only worry is whether or not they will continue those once this pandemic is over. But I think if they're adequately motivated, then they definitely would. Okay, a few other comments. But Will mentioned the importance of prevention. I don't know what the impact of the changes to Public Health England might be, whether anybody wants to comment, whether anybody has any ideas, but prevention is a key strand of all of this lot, and we must make sure that it continues in the future. And related to that is the work with other partners. There was a mention of CPFT, but clearly, as if you've just described, Chair, in East Cambs, I assume the work with the mental health training is something that perhaps the district council or others has organised. So working with district councillors, NHS, CPFT and other partners is something I would like to stress. And then the final point is I think we're all enthusiastically waiting for this government, is it green or white paper about the future of adult social care. And I don't know whether we are already making certain assumptions about what that might or might not say, particularly relating to capping the costs of service users. Is there anything in the presentation that might affect what a service user is expected to contribute in the future? But overall, a tremendous amount of really good thinking has gone on into this, and I look forward to investigating further, looking when we have future papers.
Councillor Wilson, I'll just clear up that the mental health training was organised actually by Wendy Lansdowne, who was a nominated county council employee for the East Cambs area during COVID lockdown. It was her that got it organised. So it's something identified by the communities and the volunteer effort themselves, and the leaders of the volunteers in the various communities that they put forward as potentially being helpful. So it was an excellent thing, and I think quite a number of people took part. So prevention and CPFT and future funding of social care, massive topic. Who am I looking at here? Anybody want to dive in? Charlotte, probably on prevention.
I probably want to say something about the governance around that as well, Anna.
If I work backwards, so future funding of adult social care is very quiet nationally. We have just had the announcement. So I think the government is more thinking in terms of responding to COVID at the moment. So we have had a recent announcement about 6 weeks free care being funded as it was in the post-COVID period. If people have new care needs or additional care needs. So that's, that's quite a change, but that's only until April next year. We've worked in partnership really closely with CPFT. It's sort of almost like we work so closely with CPFT and some of our CCG colleagues, we probably forget to say it sometimes, but certainly all the discharge to assess work, CPFT have actually had a lead role around that. Public Health England, we don't really, our main contact with Public Health England has obviously been as a result of COVID. I think we're very keen to get a more explicit prevention agenda that I'm keen to see a more explicit prevention agenda that does support the adult managed programme, which is why we've built the falls prevention work in. But I actually think it's a mistake to think prevention equals public health, because I think a lot of the work that Think Communities does is all about prevention. Actually, I think that's their core value and purpose in many ways, which is why it's so critical to part of our solution in terms of going forward.
Thanks, Charlotte. Wendy.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I just wanted to say that as Charlotte said, you know, the close working that we've got with health has been strengthened during COVID. We've all pulled together, but also health have led on setting up 3 or 4 actually strands of work that are looking at recovery and resilience. And in fact, they've adopted the resilience plan that you've seen today, which is brilliant. So that is a shared aspiration. And they've got the groups that they've got are one looking at the out of hospital work, one in hospital, the clinical interface, and also children and maternity. And those groups are absolutely local authority and health officers on that. And some of them also include the voluntary and community sector. So just to say, we are very much working together. But as Charlotte said, I do think the local authority are the ones driving the preventative agenda, because health are very much focused on recovery in terms of getting back to business as usual.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think we've given this quite a good airing, but it was definitely warranted because there's a huge amount in there. And I mean, everybody's talking about recovery and have been for some time now, but lots of people when they're talking about recovery seem to be talking about just kind of getting back to as far as it was close to usual before the whole thing happened, and about standing up their existing services. And actually what we're trying to do is something very different, and we're trying to capture all the good things that have come out of this horrible situation. And there have been some very positive things, and you know, drive what was already our agenda more quickly and probably more radically. And I think with a more understanding and willing audience at the other end that gets it probably in a way that we couldn't have dreamt of before. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity, and I think that's being reflected in the conversations that we've had today. I mean, I haven't heard anybody you know, other than incredibly enthusiastic about this paper and the direction of travel. So I think it's really to be commended, and thank you so much for pulling it all together and everything that's gone into it. So I haven't heard anybody speaking against it. We're really just asked to discuss, which we've done, and agree the approach for people and communities for the recovery plan and the priorities. So if anybody did want to object, if now is the time to raise your blue hand and say so, but I don't expect there to be anybody. So I will take that as unanimous support, and it goes with a massive thanks from the committee to all our officers that have inputted into this. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are on to information and monitoring section of our agenda. Item 8, which is the COVID-19 resilience funding to support the independent sector providers of adult social care. This is reporting back on something that's already basically happened, and I think Shauna is with us to take us through this paper.
Shauna's not with us, she's on leave, much needed.
Hello Oliver, so you don't look like Shauna. Over to you.
Not today anyway. So yeah, if I may, I'm going to take item 8. So this item is to note the decision that we took under emergency measures, or the Chief Executive took under emergency measures in relation to the infection control grant. The infection control grant was a £600 million pot that was issued by central government, and that equated for Cambridgeshire just over £6.1 million. The funding was split into 2 parts. 75% of that was to be directed to be allocated to residential and nursing homes to be used for the improvement of infection control measures. The 25% element of that was given with a level of local discretion for local authorities to award the funding, and how we thought was fit, following a level of consultation with our care associations across Cambridgeshire, was to award that to domiciliary care type providers, type providers, which included so home care providers, extra care providers, supported living, and also created a fund for direct payments. So the reason we took an urgency was this funding needs to have been spent and allocated by the 20th of September. The funding was awarded at the start of June this year. So we thought it was appropriate to take the urgency decision, make the decision as quickly as we reasonably could, following good and proper consultation with providers, and allow that funding to be out there at the soonest possible opportunity. So this is, as the paper says, noting that the decision has been taken by the Chief Exec under emergency measures, and still happy to take any questions that might fall out of that.
Very much, Oliver. And the main sort of guts of the area where we did actually have any decision to make are outlined in 2.1, aren't they, about how we allocated the 25% that was left after the 75% had gone straight out to care homes. And we obviously had Councillor Wilson's question right at the beginning about you know, the future, because obviously this is time limited funding. The County Council made the resilience 10% increased resilience payment back that ended at the end of June. This has effectively taken that over. And so obviously the big question is, you know, the pandemic isn't going away. They've still got infection control in the future, potentially increased staffing costs, etc. So it is you know, a big unknown, and there is that sort of hanging question from Councillor Wilson. Do any members have any other questions? And we'll make sure that we get a comment on Councillor Wilson's question from earlier as well. Will, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, if I can, just on that, just to respond to Councillor Wilson's earlier question. So we plan to share the recovery plan with our providers. You know, a key part of that plan, and we've talked about, is making sure, you know, that we've got a strong and vibrant market and that providers are resilient going forward. And we'll be asking our providers to contribute to the shape of that recovery plan. And as part of that, that will include, you know, an understanding and some recommendations around what it is that we need to invest to keep that market, you know, vibrant and resilient. So, you know, we're going to start that process by sharing the overarching recovery plan with them first, and then those discussions will inform the investment around the recovery plan going forward. I hope that answers Councillor Wilson's question.
Yeah, so it's basically a work in progress, really. Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, just very briefly and simply, will some of this money find its way into the Think Communities funding? That's all, really.
The money is being distributed. The 25%, 75% has already gone out to the care homes, and that's completely done. And the remaining 25% is being distributed to the providers under 2.1. So domiciliary care providers, extra care, supported living, and direct payment recipients for those that can show that they are needing to use PPE and infection control measures. Those are organisations working out in our communities, but it's not directly funding Think Communities related activity. Hopefully I've got all that right. Does that make sense, Sandra? Okay. Any other questions from anybody or comments? Councillor Wilson, yeah.
Can I just clarify the timescale for the work that Will's just described, and will it come back to the committee with any recommendations on how future funding to support providers is given?
I'm assuming it's part of our business planning process, or will need to be part of the business planning process, but in terms of timescales, we're going to need to be dealing with this, aren't we? I mean,
we are, and it is part, you're right, it is part of the business planning process. So I think that we'll have a much clearer picture about the ongoing support requirements in October.
So you're not anticipating any additional payments in this financial year? Is that what you're saying?
It's uncertain at the moment. So, you know, because as we've talked about, and also any sort of future funding that may come through from, for example, from government is also uncertain. So, you know, we're talking to our providers about, you know, their position and where and how we can support them, and that's not just financially. And at the same time, like I say, there's a discussion about market resilience is a key part of our recovery plan, and depending upon those discussions and the input from providers will depend upon what we come forward with. But realistically, you know, those discussions will take place, you know, during the latter part of September and the beginning of October, by which time we'll start to build up a good quality picture of what is required.
So could we have an update for the next meeting, Chair?
Well, it'll be included in the business planning paper that's due to come in October. I'm assuming we will be able to get something in for there.
Well,
yeah, we'll make sure that's included, Graham.
Thank you.
It needs to be in there explicitly and understood how we're working with providers. Okay, committee. So we're asked to note that report, which I think we've duly done. So I think we can take that as unanimous, Tamar, for the record. And we're moving on to section 9, item 9, Service Director's Update, Adults and Safeguarding and Commissioning, which it seems to be a sort of state of the nation paper. Is this Charlotte and Will, I take it? Charlotte, sorry, you're still muted.
Apologies. I was just about to say that I think we have probably covered quite a lot of it, actually. So I'm just checking down my kind of notes of things that I was going to say. So the purpose of the report really is, so at one point we were giving the committee a report specifically on COVID. And the purpose of this report really is to bring together both what would have been our COVID report with our Service Director's report. So that's kind of basically the purpose of it. I think we've talked quite a lot about the financial pressures related to COVID and the impact of lockdown, and the fact that we're still in quite a sort of uncertain situation. I think, as I said, initially we had lower referral rates, but then they've started to increase. We have actually, one of the things from an operational perspective is that we have used the process as an opportunity to think about different ways of working. So as a result of our remote working arrangements, actually there are some areas where our performance has improved, particularly around reviews. We will be bringing a deep dive on carers to the next meeting, and I mentioned to you earlier that we have got approval now to have a dedicated team of care home support of social workers who will go and support care homes. That's really supporting care homes, particularly because many of the care homes have had a really difficult period, and what we're particularly keen to do is to make sure that the quality of the work that they're doing is as good as we want it to be, really. So that will be very much a role work. It's not a contractual role. We'll work very closely with our commissioning colleagues, but it will be working alongside care homes and making sure that their practice, as I say, is in line with what we would regard as good practice and as person-centred as possible, basically. I think we've done a good job around particularly people with learning disabilities, but we are now facing some challenges about the return to day services, and we're currently very focused on the new guidance that we've got about discharge to assess. So we're both trying to make sure that the initial patients who were discharged, that we know who's responsible for their care, but we're also now working very closely with CPFT and the CCG about the new arrangements and how we make sure that people's discharge, they basically, wherever possible, people go home or back into the community, and only go into bed-based care if that's really needed. It's probably fair to say at the moment there is quite a lot of pressure on our hospitals. So the other thing that's going on in the backdrop is that the NHS colleagues are obviously expected to get back to business as usual as much as they possibly can. And the paper also reports on the work that we've done within Adults Positive Challenge, which I won't repeat again. So I think I've probably covered it. I think the only other thing I would say from the perspective of sort of frontline staff is that people, we've really tried to encourage people to take a break over the summer period, because we're aware that, you know, people were fairly tired, but also people are very motivated about wanting to get things as right as they possibly can, whilst also, as Councillor Bailey said, making sure that we are protecting our staff and the people responsible from the risk of infection. So it's a very busy time where we're sort of balancing both, you know, response to COVID, anticipating what might be coming in future, whilst also trying to get and maintain our business as usual priorities and our transformation agenda, really. So I don't know, Will, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
No, thanks, Charlotte. I think that's a really good summary. I mean, our focus is very much on the recovery and resilience going forward, and making sure that we've got the right level of kind of services and capacity in place. And I think under section 2.8 is a good indication of the amount of sort of and the extent of work that's being undertaken across health and social care to ensure we've got the right level of support in place for the coming period. But it is a very, very busy time.
Thank you both. And just from the perspective of myself, I sit on the STP board, and it's probably just worth mentioning, you know, the pressure that is now coming onto the NHS. I mean, it's got a huge amount on its plate in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. You know, I don't think the financial pressure is in any way going away, frankly, despite announcements that might make people think to the contrary. And it's also got the looming deadline of April next year, when it has to become an integrated care system. And, you know, I'm not quite sure how we're doing with that either. So there's a huge amount going on, and, you know, it's in the middle of a pandemic and trying to stand up services and get back to offering full set of services that our residents need. So there's an awful lot going on, and therefore we always have to be conscious of that in our interactions with the NHS. I've got Councillor Wilson first.
Thanks, Chair. And I think first we should just formally acknowledge our thanks to all the staff for all the excellent work that is described in this paper and elsewhere, because it is an extremely busy time, a lot of uncertainty as to what the winter is going to throw at us. The one thing which I wanted to raise was about the financial position, because I thought I'd had a report back from GPC where Chris Mallion indicated that from a county council overall, we were in a relatively balanced position. But 2.1 seems to imply that at the end of June, adult social care is expecting to forecast an overspend of 7.5 million. And then later on down, it says something about we're anticipating that the situation could get even worse in the future. So do we still have a deficit of 7.5 million, or is that now offset by the various government grants that are coming in, or are we not yet really sure?
Wendy, do you want to?
Happy to. It would be fair to say, Graham, that it's a changing picture. So obviously we've put in a number of business cases to MHCLG to say that we've had to spend X amount of additional money due to COVID, and we haven't heard what we're going to get back and what we're not going to get back on those business cases. The numbers do change all the time. Obviously, we're still collecting data on the pressures. So Chris virtually weekly is providing data to us on where we're at with the budgets, but I think it would be fair to say we are seeing significant pressures coming through, and that remains. But it is a changing picture.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crawford.
I've already taken in what Wendy has said, and the fact that we might not have any financial pictures till October. But I wondered Is there any promise from the government on the horizon about any special tranches of COVID funding for next year at all, or have we already received that?
Do you want me to come in again, Anna? We've already received some funding, which included the infection control fund that was seeded through the council, went straight out to the care homes. But as of yet, we haven't received any additional information about what future funding we might get in terms of the impact of COVID going forward.
What we have obviously got ongoing is the income losses funding stream, where we're able to recover after taking off the first 5%, we're able to recover 75% of lost income in certain areas. Doesn't include commercial income, so that's an ongoing thing as well. So that, and that presumably that changes month by month. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about the finances, so I think the answers to Councillor Wilson's points covered what I was going to ask.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other blue hands. So any other members wanting to ask anything, just to check? No, we're asked to note and comment on the contents of the report, which I think we've done. So thank you very much to officers. Which brings us to item 10, which is the Adults Committee Agenda Plan and the Committee Training Plan. Tamar, there's an update to the agenda plan, I think. Do you want to just tell us about that?
There is. There are two reports added to the 8th of October meeting. So business case on transformation funding bid for a micro enterprise pilot, and also a report on Care Suites working group.
And so just as a heads up to members of this committee, we're looking to convene a working group to oversee the work around the development of Care Suites, which is an exciting project. And the thought is that we should try and recruit members from other committees, because this really has the potential to be a brilliant piece of cross-committee working, I think. So we were thinking that we would have somebody from the Health Committee, somebody from General Purposes, someone from the Adults Committee, obviously, someone from Commercial and Investment, and somebody from Communities and Partnership. So I think it could be a really strong working group that looks across committees. So bearing that in mind, for next time, we'll be looking for nominations for people from those different committees to come onto the working group. Did anyone have anything else on the forward agenda or the training plan to talk about or raise? No. Okay. Committee members, remember, we mustn't rush off now. We've got an exempt item to deal with. So the final item, which is item so the date of the next meeting, just so that we get that into the public domain, is the 8th of October. And then we've got a final item to deal with. Item. Oh, sorry, Tamar.
Sorry, it's November. Oh no, it is October. Sorry.
October. 8th of October. Yeah. No, your notes are perfect, Tamar. The brain is failing, obviously. Okay, so to deal with the final item, which is 13 on the agenda, which is the request to increase the contract length of block contract opportunity for residential nursing and planned respite care beds. It needs to be exempt from publication, so the committee does need now to decide whether to exclude the press and the public from consideration of this report, on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under the Local Government Act 1972, and that it wouldn't be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. So can I ask if there's a general consensus in support of this recommendation to move into exempt session?
Great.
If any, yeah. Oh, Councillor Howell?
Only to say I agree. No more.
Yes, okay, so I'm not seeing any dissension to that. So members, we will go straight on to our Microsoft Teams meeting. So if you can come off this meeting and go straight into the Teams meeting, that would be great. And we'll see you shortly. Thanks.